Hi, and welcome to the Your Story Studios podcast, a podcast where we talk about all things content creation. And today we have John Tucker with us, and we're going to be talking about finding the perfect B camera for our A camera. So, John, what is your A camera?
My A camera is now the Sony FX6.
That's the same as me, yep. What is your B camera currently for the FX6?
My B camera on most interview shoots and stuff like that has been the Blackmagic Pocket Cinema Camera 4K.
And how have you found that?
Really good, surprisingly. And that's sort of what I thought it'd be interesting to talk about. Couldn't really get... It's a pretty different camera, right? It's Micro Four Thirds, it's, different brand and all that kind of stuff. But it's been working really well. That's the interesting thing. I wanted to find out your perspective as well, because you've had a lot of different B cams over time. Like, a lot of people want to stick with the same brand, but I don't know what your thoughts are on this. Like,
I have many.
Yeah. Well, a lot of people, it seems like even when unless they're using the exact same camera, even within the same brand, they still don't necessarily match straight away. You still got to work at it. So do the benefits, are they really that strong?
Yeah, well, as you mentioned before, I have had several different B cameras over my video creating journey. When I started my video production company, I went to the Panasonic EVA 1, and then I eventually got the Panasonic S1 camera. They're both Panasonic cameras, but they're two completely different cameras. One's a Super 35 camera, which was the EVA 1, and one is a full frame, which was the S1. And one of the things that really annoyed me about that combo, even though they both shot Vlog in 10-bit and I could get the colors to match, the lenses were really annoying to me because of just doing the math on set all the time. So on the EVA 1, this lens is an 18 to 35, but really full frame equivalency, it's 70 mils or whatever. And then on the full frame camera, just doing all that math, it's just one definitely. Extra thing. Yes, it's simple math, but it's just one extra thing that I had to think about. And I was like, all right, that's annoying. So I eventually then went to Sony and got full frame cameras. So I've got the Sony FX6, and my main B camera for that is the A7S III. And they've both got, people say it's the same sensor. I'm sure it's the same sensor, but if you record them side by side, they will look a little bit different depending, and it could be user error sometimes as well. So they have different codecs. There's also, when you put different lenses in front of the cameras, they'll have different looks. And also, even if you dial in the white balance manually and say, all right, I want it to be 5500. 5500 on the FX6 may look different to 5500 on the A7S III.
Yeah. And that's weird, right? You'd expect it to be, as we're saying, the same brand, same sensor.
Yep.
It should match, and that's why you want them to be the same in a sense. But it's interesting that the processing or something's different that makes...
There's something in the camera that makes it a little bit different. I'm not 100% sure. I'm not a camera engineer. I'm just someone that uses these things. And it's a lot of trial by error, or whatever the saying is.
well, definitely. And that's what it's about. Like, it's funny you bring up the full frame Super 35 difference, because I've often thinking about one that I might want to get in the future and looking at the FX30, because, if money was no object, I'd go buy an FX3 and I'd just forget about it. But
why wouldn't you just get, so to me, the perfect B camera to your A camera is another A camera if you're wanting it to line up and look exactly the same. But as we just said, it won't be the same. Why would you go for the FX3 as opposed to the Sony FX6?
Because of versatility, I think, for something that I can easily throw on a gimbal. Because when I'm using a gimbal on set, I usually like to have a camera that lives on the gimbal.
Yeah, that is wise.
I hate balancing in the middle of a shoot because
you got people standing around watching you going, oh, what's taking so long?
Yeah, exactly. Yep. And so I guess if money was no object, I would have two FX6s and an FX3. But yeah, just having a bit of versatility there. When I started with the GH3s, I had two GH3s because they were cheap enough to just get two. And that was great. Same settings, look the same, easy life. But when you're spending like $8,000-9,000 on a camera, you don't always want to spend twice that on a B cam. And so that's why I think a lot of people try to think of something else for the versatility, but also something that's a bit cheaper as well.
Yeah, and that will also match up as much as possible.
Yeah, and so that's the surprising thing. Like with the FX6 and the Blackmagic, as long as I do a custom white balance on both.
Yeah, that's the critical.
Yeah, and on shoots where if I'm shooting for somebody else and they actually want a Rec 709 deliverable, like they don't want to deal with log, I've actually found that if I use I've created my own LUT in Resolve for each of them that will bring them both either into like Resolve color management or ACES. Mm-hmm. And if I load the LUT into both of those cameras, both of those can actually record that LUT, like burn it into the footage.
Yeah, that's a great feature.
Which the GH6 doesn't do, which annoys me.
The A7S III doesn't do that.
It's so annoying. So, because the ability to do that means that I can actually deliver Rec 709 footage that more or less matches, which has been really awesome.
Yeah, that's definitely a feature that when I'm looking for another camera to purchase, I need to have that. That's one of the deal breakers. If it's not in there today, then I'll look for the next camera or wait for another camera to come out to be able to do that. It is a bit annoying with Sony and their firmware updates. I have a love-hate relationship with it because when I got the Sony FX6, I got the Sony FX6 and then they brought out the Sony A7 IV mirrorless camera and they brought out this new feature that we'd never seen before called lens breathing compensation. Yeah. And I've got this really expensive, to me, cinema camera that doesn't have it. And I'm like, Sony, what are you doing? And then I remember asking one of our local video equipment places, Videocraft, do you think that Sony's going to give us a firmware update for the FX6? And they and ahed and they didn't know. They actually said, the A7 IV has it because it's got possibly a newer processor. The FX6 might not be able to do it. So I left that place that day a little bit defeated thinking, that's no good. And then like a week later, I see a video on YouTube. All right, Sony FX6 firmware 2 update. We've got lens breathing compensation. I remember just cheering when I saw that. I was like, oh, that's fantastic. So that's my love part for the Sony firmware updates. And my hate part is seeing cameras like the Sony A7S III and the FX3, which are very similar cameras. Some would say they've got the exact same sensor and all that kind of stuff, because it does. And then all of a sudden, so the A7S III came out first and then the FX3 came out. And it was really puzzling as to why you would buy and pay more for this FX3.
Have they just changed the body? Like, is that it?
They added a fan, they added a tally light, and there were maybe a few other things that they did, but it wasn't enough for me to go, oh, my A7S III is garbage. I don't need it anymore. So I kept it. They took off the EVF from the FX3. So there's no EVF on the FX3. And when I was initially using the A7S III, I was using it as a hybrid camera. So photo and video. Believe it or not, you can take 12 megapixel photos for social media.
Which is another thing to consider.
Yeah. So I did use the EVF, but now I don't use the EVF on the A7S III because I've got an A7R5 to take photos and be my hybrid camera. Yeah. Sony A7S III was very similar to the FX3, and then they started bringing out these firmware updates, and I'm like, oh, okay, I understand. They start adding lens breathing compensation, I think, and all these other things. And
to the FX3?
To the FX3. And I'm like, hang on, you're adding that there, but what about the A7?
But not here, because and if they say it's a photography camera, so maybe it doesn't need it, but it's not. It's been made to be a hybrid, like video camera, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure what the excuse was, but in June 2024, the A7S III now does have lens breathing compensation. But the FX3 does have a few other things. I think that just got shutter angle, which I don't think the A7S III has. So that's like a cinema tool that you would expect.
I love using it.
Yeah, I use that on the FX6.
You just don't have to think about it. It's great.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just little things like that with the firmware updates with Sony. And you can go on YouTube and see other creators very upset that Sony's flagship mirrorless camera, the A1, doesn't have all these features that the newer lower consumer cameras have. So all these new cameras that are coming out, like the Sony ZV-E1 and the Sony A7C II and all those ones, they have lens breathing compensation. You can burn LUTs into them, these things. But then the A1 doesn't have it.
There was also a lot of annoyance, I think, from a lot of FX9 users when the FX6 came out for a very similar reason.
No, I wasn't an FX9 user, so I didn't care.
So that's fine, right?
It's all good, yeah. And I was like, oh, I picked the right camera.
It does seem like, though, yes, there are those issues, but Sony does seem to, over time, if they can, bring the features in, which seems to be pretty good. One thing that annoyed me about the GH6 was that something like that live LUT, which is what I think, no, they call it real-time LUT. And so the G9 Mark II came out not long after the GH6, and it had real-time LUT and autofocus that bloody worked. So let's not go into that just yet. But, it had these features, and I'm thinking the GH6, the powerful processor that it had, surely that's something you can add via firmware. Just give me a LUT that I can burn in. And you go on the forums and you say, like, why doesn't the GH6 have this? And they'll go, it's easy to add a LUT in post. Why would you limit your... I know, all right? Like, there are reasons why you would do it, like I just said before, but everyone just thinks like, there's no need for it because it's easy to do in post. But it's like, if it wasn't a feature that was needed, it wouldn't exist, right? And if they can put it in, why not? And if it's not a good feature, why are they putting it in their latest cameras? So there's a lot of excuses being made a lot of the time, but it does get frustrating. I don't know whether it's just like R&D needing to put the time aside to put it into the old cameras. They're too busy working on new ones, or
they're safeguarding their other more expensive cameras and not wanting to add too many features or whatever. Just try to entice you to buy the new shiny toy, which it works.
Yeah, definitely. But I've heard Canon users talking about that a lot. What's that guy that's got that the Camera Conspiracies channel talks about the Canon
Casey.
The Canon cripple hammer.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, I do enjoy watching some of those videos.
I do enjoy his videos. They're really funny. Yeah. They're good.
Coming back to the B camera, you were looking at Sony FX30s.
Yeah, but then you were talking about the sensor size difference, and that's something that's putting me off that, because I like to have like a lens set, right?
Yep.
So if we're talking about cinema lenses, I might get like a 21, a 40 and a 90 or something like that. And then if you're doing an interview and you want to utilize those same lenses, if I put the 40 on the A cam, what am I going to put on the B cam? If I've got another full frame camera, I could put the 90 there, right? And that's going to be a good kind of balance. But if I've got a Super 35, it's like, well, if I put the 90, it's going to be way too tight. And it's like, well, and I don't have two 40s. So it's like, what am I going to put on that other camera? So at the moment, I got the Blackmagic, and I've got a whole other set of lenses for that seem to match pretty well. So I'm using micro four thirds lenses on that. I'm using this E mount here. So it makes me think I want to go full frame. So it's like, okay, but I also, like you said, those little features that maybe the A7S doesn't have that I like to have. Like, I think it might have actually got timecode recently.
Yeah, probably. I don't use timecode. Do you use timecode much?
Timecode for me, I never did. And then, like a lot of people say about the internal NDs on the FX6, it's like one of those things, once I've started, it's like I have to use it all the time now. Like, I find it really cool. The first time I tried to sync clips in Resolve using timecode, I thought it didn't work properly, because I selected the clips and said sync via timecode, and then it just went back and nothing happened.
Yeah.
But it had just happened so fast that
I
didn't realize, because there's no like progress bar, because it's all just metadata. So I find it really handy. Like, it's really cool. Really speeds up my workflow. I can just select all the clips and say sync by a timecode, and it'll just find any timecode that matches and put them together. So I actually find it really handy. So if I'm going to invest in a new camera, I want to continue to have that functionality and all that kind of thing. But sometimes I need to shoot photos, like you were saying as well. So that's a big part of it as well. So there's so many things to consider.
So you haven't found the perfect B camera yet?
Not yet. I see you've got the R5 now.
Yeah.
You had the R4 before?
No, I didn't have the R4. I had the A7 IV.
Oh, the A7 IV.
Yeah,
okay.
and then I sold that and then got the shiny new toy because I wanted to try something different. And I liked the flip out screen as well. So not only could you just have it directly behind the camera and tilt it out, you could also flip it out. And,
yeah,
it can go at 4-axis or something like that.
That's probably my favorite thing on the GH6 actually. Yeah, just having that.
So that's, because the I saw that's on the GH7, and the GH6 and GH7 are basically the same
Pretty much the same body, yeah. So I never thought how much, because the GH ones, they always flipped out. and up. But just having one that just flips up is just, I don't know, it's awesome. Like, it's such a little thing, but.
I had that feature on the Panasonic S1 and I really liked it, but it only flipped out, I think. I don't think it...
I didn't flip around, yeah.
I like that. The biggest drawback with the A7R5 I find is there's a crop in the 4K 50p or 60p mode. I used to think it was a 1.5 APS-C crop, and I made a video about it recently and someone corrected me and said it's actually a 1.24.
Okay.
There's still a crop. And I also use lens breathing compensation. So there's, I believe, I should do these tests before I start saying this, but I believe there'll be another crop added to that. And then if you add active stabilization as well, doing handheld stuff, there might be another crop on top of that.
Yeah.
I'll probably actually, thinking of it now, make a video.
There's some good tests. I mean, like Gerald Undone and all those people, they do these tests and really figure everything out. And it's such a time saver because if you find someone else that's done them,
you don't have to worry about it. And then you actually, figure out what's actually happening with the camera settings.
And that is a big benefit of the Micro Four Thirds. I've found something like the GH6, GH7 is that because it's got the smaller sensor, it does, 4K 120 stabilization, does all this stuff. And no matter what mode you shoot in, it pretty much never crops. And so that's one advantage.
One less thing you have to think about.
But one thing, and I wonder how it'd work with your R5, when I'm using the GH6 as a B cam to say, I used to use it with the Blackmagic, because the GH6 had a higher resolution sensor, I just found that was one of the main differences that made it look different as a B cam. It was so much sharper.
Yeah.
And not necessarily in a good way, and that's a much higher resolution as well, isn't it?
Yeah, it does. It can shoot 8K. It's got 61 megapixels, so it's a completely different sensor to the FX6, which is 12 point whatever megapixels, and 4K. Oh, well, with the A7R5, I haven't really used that much as a B camera. I'm using it today as my main camera shot here. So let me know in the comments.
Does Nathan look sharper than I do?
Yeah, exactly, because he's on the FX6 right now.
Yeah.
With that said, I also use diffusion filters. So I use the Tiffin Black Pro Mist 1/8. So that can help soften the image and not make it look so digitally sharp. So when I'm looking at the image, I don't normally think, oh no, that's a lot sharper or whatever. I'm mainly looking at the colors and seeing how well they're lining up for my B camera. So that is a good point. Different sensors, different resolutions, and downscaling, and is it downscaling or is it pixel binning? Stuff like that. I think, as we said earlier, the perfect B camera to your A camera is probably another A camera. But with that said, having the versatility. So with my other mirrorless cameras, it's a smaller body. It's also got IBIS, so in-body image stabilization. And that's really handy if I want to be going handheld and not use my Cine Saddle or an Easy Rig.
Yeah, definitely, especially with a smaller camera because it's lighter. You kind of need it, right?
Whereas I don't have the IBIS on my FX6. And that's why when I saw the announcement of the Sony Burano, I was like, I saw internal NDs, and which I love in my FX6, and then IBIS as well. I was like, oh my goodness.
But that wasn't possible. They told
us that, physics says no. But Sony found a way, and that's one of the exciting things I think about where we're at right now with the camera camera industry is seeing how people or how companies are going to be pushing their products, because there's only so much resolution or Ks or whatever that you chuck into a camera before people are like,
that's enough Ks.
That's enough. Like even my deliverables for my corporate clients, it's 1080p.
Yeah, and that's what everyone thinks that 4K, like on YouTube, it's like you have to have 4K or it's not professional. But in most, like you point out, like most professional environments, we're still delivering in HD.
Yeah. So camera companies can't just be like, all right, it's a 20K. Well, Blackmagic makes like a 17K camera or whatever. That's fine. But everyone else, they're not really, from what I can see, really focusing on that. They might be trying to push towards like 6K, 8K stuff, but not as quickly as I thought they were going to be, which is interesting. They're looking at these other features which are useful for us video creators.
Definitely. Well, that was a big thing when the GH7 came out. I'm like, what is it going to take for me to want to just upgrade the GH6, especially when I'm not even on that, I'm moving away from that system. Like could that be a good B cam? And I have definitely considered that. And internal NDs, like in the Burano you're talking about with stabilization, if they put internal NDs into the GH7, it would have just been like no brainer. Like everyone go out and get this camera. It's going to be amazing.
Yeah,
but I was thinking
the first thing people say to that is, oh, but it's micro four thirds.
Yeah.
And that's what I would say. I'd be like,
Yeah,
but it's
yeah.
not full frame. So if they then took like the S5 or whatever Panasonic's got right now,
and did that.
and put internal NDs and good stabilization and all that kind of stuff, yeah, that'd be onto a winner.
Yeah.
For sure.
Well, because like the other thing, like the GH6 is the role that needs to fill for me now in my business is like social media, travel, type of camera, something that can sit on a gimbal and all this kind of thing. And the one thing that's holding it back from fulfilling that really well is the autofocus. Because when you're on a gimbal, it's great to have autofocus, that kind of thing. If you're filming yourself for whatever reason, for YouTube or whatever, like you were saying in the GH4 video that you were trying out the other day, not having that autofocus when you're filming yourself it's a pain. Mm-hmm. And the GH7 solves that. But I feel a little bit burnt, having only got the GH6 a couple of years ago, that when I got it, I knew it didn't have it, but I didn't think they could do it. And then 6 months later, the G9 Mark II comes out or something like that. And it's like, oh, you could have waited. And a lot of us, rightly or wrongly, are feeling a little bit scorned and not necessarily wanting to jump out and spend another close to $4,000 on another camera for that reason. So I don't know yet. I don't know. You said you were considering it potentially.
I was, but I'm not now.
You're not now. I convinced you otherwise.
No, I'm just going and doing that GH4 video again. I looked at the quality. Well, obviously the quality from a GH4 versus a GH7 is going to be different, but I think I'll just keep using the Sony cameras. So right now I'm looking at getting a camera or multiple cameras in the long term to be in my studio space. So Studio Alpha in my YouTube studio. So I've got permanent cameras that just live here. They don't go out onto professional sets. I can just have them here and not have to worry about settings being changed and all that kind of stuff. And I was going towards the Sony ZV-E1, but the biggest problem with that was potential overheating. Yeah. You can get fans, but that can cool it down and possibly extend the run life or whatever. But it's just like lens adapters. It's an extra thing that could go wrong and all that kind of stuff. And it's an extra thing you got to set up.
It's something you don't want on your mind when you're doing video. Is you don't want to be thinking, oh, what's the temperature?
Is it going to overheat today? Yeah, it needs to be reliable. So I got recommended the Sony A7C Mark II. Okay. So I haven't
really heard of much about that one.
I saw when it came out and I didn't pay too much attention because it was in a lower consumer grade tier, I felt, than what I was really looking for. So anything like FX6, A7R5 is the kind of tier that I was looking for. And then the A7C Mark II was a little bit lower.
Yeah.
But for what I'm wanting in this studio space, it's still overkill for what I need, but it does solve a lot of the problems that I want. And apparently that camera doesn't overheat, or from the reviews that I've watched, people have said, oh yeah, we've used it for until the battery dies and until the card is full and no overheating whatsoever. And we're in hot conditions as well. It doesn't seem to have that issue. So
could be a winner. Yeah, I might have to check it out as well.
Yeah, it could be a winner. So I'll check that out, but I'm not sure. It's good, I think, for studio work. So it's got bad rolling shutter, I think. So I've got these cameras locked off on a tripod. I'm not doing whip pans and all that. So there are obviously limitations to it, but for my use cases in a studio space like this, it could be pretty good.
Yeah, you might want to introduce whip pans into the podcast at some point.
Well, I could do that in post. I'll just... Hi, and welcome to the Your Story Studios podcast.
But there's so many options. That's the weird thing. Like, I think you had a video recently about, exciting new cameras, and it's just like, it's true. There are so many new cameras coming out. And like I was saying, with like color matching and color management, when you're utilizing that, you kind of can use a whole different range of cameras if you know what you're doing. So the options are kind of endless, and it makes it even harder to make a decision sometimes.
Yeah. I think to wrap up this episode, my final thought on using different brands and all that kind of stuff, I've gone all in basically on Sony, and that's because of accessories, lenses, that kind of stuff. So I know that every lens that I own will go on every single camera that I currently own or will hopefully own in the future. I don't have to worry about lens adapters or, oh, I've got that 50mm f1.2, but it won't go onto this camera, which I need it to. Oh dear.
I'm going to carry more gear then as well.
Yeah, but then also like the sound, some of my sound accessories as well. So I've got the wireless dual channel receiver, and that goes on all my cameras, including the mirrorless cameras, because Sony's got the hot shoe interface. So that's really helpful. And I love having that option of using the adapter on the receiver that goes straight into the camera, so I don't need to have any extra cables or anything like that. It's really handy. So what I would I guess caution people when looking for a good B camera is what accessories or what other things other than the camera do you need to have to make this whole system work. If you've already got lenses like yourself for Micro Four Thirds and you can make it work and all those little annoyances that we've just talked about, sensor sizes and stuff like that aren't deal breakers or whatever, then that's great. But well, if you need to purchase new equipment, then I would strongly recommend, going into one system and then having stuff just for the whole versatility, I guess. And then if you don't want to get two cameras exactly the same, get two cameras that are different, but also hopefully line up as much as possible. So I think the no-brainer these days for a lot of people is if you've got an FX6, you'll get an FX3 as a B camera, and it's a little bit cheaper. It also has IBIS, which the FX6 doesn't have, so you can then put it onto, or you can do handheld and you can put it on a gimbal because it's smaller as well. FX6 can go on gimbals, but you got to strip it all down and it's just a headache. So I've never really done it.
And you want to, it is good to have one built up camera and one stripped down camera that you can, put to different uses. I think that's a big part of it.
Yeah, absolutely. I've found that to be really helpful. I refer to my A7S III as my gimbal camera, but it can come off the gimbal if I really need to and put it on a tripod like I've done today with the podcast. Whenever you're purchasing a camera, always purchase something that is as versatile as possible, doesn't lock you in too much. But then also if you're getting a second camera to be the B camera for that, hopefully have or get a camera that has features that that other one doesn't have, but is helpful as well, that you will actually use. It's all well and good that this other camera can shoot open gate, but if you don't shoot open gate, then who cares? It's all well and good if they're putting ProRes RAW into stuff, but if you never shoot ProRes RAW, what's the point?
And that goes for upgrading as well. Like some people, just because a new camera comes out doesn't mean you need to get it.
That's right.
That's it. And thanks. That's given me a lot to think about as well. And I will definitely keep that in mind as I try to be patient. I'm usually quite impulsive when it comes to these kind of things, but I need to just calm down, think about, like you said, what kind of jobs I got coming up and all of those issues, and hopefully be able to let you know where it lands. Yeah, well, hopefully we'll have you back on another episode of the Your Story Studios podcast. John, thanks for coming today. Thanks.